Have you ever imagined standing face to face with a burning bush that isn't consumed by flames? Or confronting a powerful ruler and demanding freedom for an entire nation? What if you witnessed a sea parting before your eyes, providing a path to safety while an army pursued you? These are not just tales from ancient times, but pivotal moments that have shaped history and continue to inspire millions around the world. Welcome to our journey through one of the most extraordinary stories ever told, the epic of Moses in the Exodus from Egypt. This isn't just a recounting of old events, it's an exploration of miracles, faith, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. But what really happened during those dramatic days? How did Moses, once a humble shepherd, become a legendary leader who changed the course of history? What secrets lie behind the 10 plagues that struck Egypt? Why did the Israelites create a golden calf while Moses was receiving the 10 commandments? How did manna and quail miraculously appear in the desert to feed a hungry nation? What lessons can we learn from the parting of the Red Sea and the crossing that followed? In this video, we'll dive deep into 8 captivating events that define the Exodus story, but that's not all. Throughout this video, we'll not only recount these events, but also uncover the profound lessons they hold for us today. How do these ancient stories relate to our modern struggles and aspirations? Can the faith and perseverance shown by Moses and the Israelites inspire us to overcome our own challenges? So are you ready to embark on this epic adventure? Stay with us until the end, and you'll find answers to these questions and more. We'll reveal insights that might just change the way you view these age-old narratives, and perhaps even how you see your own journey. Grab a comfortable seat, and let's step back in time to witness the wonders, confront the challenges, and celebrate the triumphs of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt. Your adventure awaits. The story of Moses in the burning bush is a pivotal moment in the Bible. It marks the beginning of Moses' journey to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. This event happens when Moses is living a quiet life as a shepherd, and it changes his life forever. Moses had fled Egypt years earlier after he killed an Egyptian who was harming a Hebrew slave. He settled in the land of Midian, married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest, and became a shepherd for his father-in-law's flock. One day Moses leads the sheep to the far side of the desert and comes to Mount Horeb, also known as the Mountain of God. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. As he is watching over the sheep, Moses notices a strange sight. There is a bush that is on fire, but it is not burning up. The flames are visible, but the bush remains intact. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. Curious about this unusual phenomenon, Moses decides to take a closer look. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When God sees that Moses is approaching the bush, he calls out to him by name. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses! And Moses said, Here I am. God instructs Moses not to come any closer and tells him to remove his sandals because he is standing on holy ground. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. God introduces himself to Moses as the God of his ancestors. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses realizes he is in the presence of the Almighty and feels a mix of awe and fear. God tells Moses that he has seen the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. He declares his plan to rescue them. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. God then tells Moses that he is to be the one to lead this mission. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses is hesitant and questions his own ability. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" This name signifies God's eternal and self-existent nature. God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." He tells Moses to gather the elders of Israel and inform them of God's plan to rescue them. God also mentions that the king of Egypt will resist, but he will perform wonders to compel Pharaoh to let the people go. "But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go." The burning bush encounter is a profound moment where Moses transitions from a shepherd to a prophet and leader. Despite his fears and doubts, Moses accepts God's call. This event sets in motion the liberation of the Israelites from slavery and their journey toward the Promised Land. The story highlights themes of faith, obedience, and God's concern for his people. After meeting God at the burning bush, Moses returns to Egypt to fulfill God's command to free the Israelites from slavery. Joined by his brother Aaron, Moses approaches Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to demand the release of the Israelite people. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say that the Lord, the God of Israel, commands him to let his people go so they can hold a festival in the wilderness, Exodus 5:1. Pharaoh responds dismissively, questioning, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" He does not recognize the God of Israel and refuses to let the people go, Exodus 5:2. Angered by their request, Pharaoh decides to make the Israelites work even harder. He orders that they must gather their own straw to make bricks, but still meet the same production quota, Exodus 5:6-8. The Israelites struggle under this heavier load, and their supervisors are beaten when the quotas aren't met, Exodus 5:14. The Israelites blame Moses and Aaron for their worsening situation, Exodus 5:20-21. Feeling discouraged, Moses turns to God and asks why he has brought trouble upon the people and why he hasn't rescued them as promised, Exodus 5:22-23. God reassures Moses, reminding him of the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He promises that he will deliver the Israelites from bondage with great acts of judgment, Exodus 6:6-8. God instructs Moses to return to Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. Moses expresses doubt, saying that if his own people won't listen to him, why would Pharaoh? He also mentions his faltering speech, Exodus 6:12-30. God insists and appoints Aaron to speak on Moses' behalf, Exodus 7:1-2. When Pharaoh asks for a miracle to prove their authority, Aaron throws down his staff, and it turns into a snake. Pharaoh's magicians do the same with their staffs, but Aaron's staff swallows theirs, Exodus 7:10-12. Despite this sign, Pharaoh's heart remains stubborn. Since Pharaoh refuses to listen, God sends a series of plagues upon Egypt. Each plague demonstrates God's power and challenges the Egyptian gods. Throughout these events, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. Sometimes he seems to relent under the pressure of the plagues, but once relief comes, he changes his mind. This pattern demonstrates his stubbornness and unwillingness to acknowledge the Lord's authority. God tells Moses that he is allowing Pharaoh's heart to be hard to show his power and make his name known throughout the earth, Exodus 9:16. The plagues serve not only as punishment for Egypt, but also as signs to both the Egyptians and the Israelites of God's sovereignty. God informs Moses of one last plague that will compel Pharaoh to release the Israelites. He instructs Moses to tell the people to ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold, as they have found favor in their eyes, Exodus 11:1-3. This sets the stage for the Passover and the eventual exodus from Egypt. Moses' confrontations with Pharaoh highlight the struggle between obedience to God and human stubbornness. Despite clear signs and wonders, Pharaoh chooses to resist, leading to greater suffering for his people. The events underscore the themes of liberation, faith, and the consequences of hardening one's heart against divine instruction. The 10 plagues of Egypt are dramatic events where God demonstrates his power to Pharaoh and the Egyptians to persuade them to release the Israelites from slavery. Each plague challenges the authority of Egyptian gods and reveals the might of the God of Israel. Below is a simple explanation of each plague, including relevant Bible verses. Moses and Aaron meet Pharaoh by the Nile River. Following God's command, Aaron raises his staff and strikes the waters of the Nile. All the water turns into blood. The fish die and the river smells terrible, making it impossible for the Egyptians to drink from it. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. Despite this, Pharaoh's magicians used their secret arts to replicate the miracle, and Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn. God instructs Moses to tell Aaron to stretch out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs come up and cover the land. Frogs invade homes, bedrooms, and even jump onto people. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. Pharaoh's magicians also bring up frogs, but Pharaoh pleads with Moses to pray to God to remove them. Once the frogs die, Pharaoh hardens his heart again and refuses to let the Israelites go. Third plague, gnats appear everywhere. Aaron is told to strike the dust of the ground with his staff, and the dust turns into gnats throughout Egypt. The tiny insects bother people and animals alike. They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. This time the magicians cannot replicate the plague and tell Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Yet Pharaoh remains unyielding. God sends dense swarms of flies into Pharaoh's palace and the homes of his officials. The land is ruined by the flies. However, God spares the region of Goshen, where the Israelites live. No flies appear there. And the Lord did this. Dense swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the houses of his officials. Throughout Egypt, the land was ruined by the flies. Pharaoh tries to negotiate, allowing the Israelites to sacrifice within Egypt. But Moses insists they must go into the wilderness. After Moses prays and the flies leave, Pharaoh breaks his promise again. God sends a severe plague that kills the Egyptians' livestock: horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. But none of the Israelites' animals die. And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Despite investigating and finding that none of the Israelite animals had died, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. God instructs Moses and Aaron to take handfuls of soot from a furnace and toss it into the air in front of Pharaoh. The soot becomes fine dust over Egypt, causing festering boils on people and animals. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. Even Pharaoh's magicians are afflicted and cannot stand before Moses. Still, Pharaoh does not listen. God sends the worst hailstorm Egypt has ever seen. Moses stretches out his staff toward the sky, and thunder, hail, and lightning strike the land. The hail destroys crops and kills anyone and any animal left outside. When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. The hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. In Goshen, where the Israelites live, there is no hail. Pharaoh admits his sin and promises to let the Israelites go. But once the storm stops, he changes his mind. God warns Pharaoh through Moses about the upcoming plague of locusts. When Pharaoh refuses again, Moses stretches out his staff over Egypt, and an east wind brings in swarms of locusts. They eat every plant left after the hailstorm. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Pharaoh hastily calls Moses and admits his sin, but once more goes back on his word after the locusts are gone. God instructs Moses to stretch out his hand toward the sky, and darkness envelops Egypt for 3 days. It's so dark that the Egyptians cannot see each other or leave their homes. Yet the Israelites have light where they live. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Pharaoh tells Moses that the people can go but must leave their flocks behind. Moses insists that they need their animals for sacrifices. Pharaoh becomes angry and warns Moses never to appear before him again. God announces the final plague. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from Pharaoh's own son to the son of the slave, and even the firstborn of the cattle. So Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die." God provides instructions to the Israelites to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb, so the destroying angel will pass over their homes. This event becomes known as the Passover. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. At midnight, the Lord strikes down all the firstborn in Egypt. There is loud wailing throughout the land. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt. Finally, Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron and tells them to leave Egypt with all the Israelites and their belongings. The 10 plagues of Egypt demonstrate God's power over nature and the gods of Egypt. Each plague targets specific deities the Egyptians worshipped, showing that the God of Israel is the one true God. Pharaoh's persistent hardening of his heart leads to the suffering of his people. The plagues culminate in the liberation of the Israelites, setting the stage for their journey to the Promised Land. These events highlight themes of obedience, judgment, and redemption. The story of the plagues serves as a reminder of God's sovereignty and his commitment to fulfill his promises to his people. The first Passover is a crucial event in the story of Moses and the Exodus. It marks the moment when God delivers the final and most devastating plague upon Egypt, leading to the liberation of the Israelites from slavery. This event establishes the Passover feast, a lasting ordinance for the Jewish people. Setting the scene. After 9 plagues have struck Egypt, Pharaoh still refuses to let the Israelites go. God tells Moses that one more plague will compel Pharaoh to release his people. God explains that he will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn male, both human and animal. The blood on the door frames will be a sign for God to pass over those homes, sparing the inhabitants. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. The plague executed. At midnight, the Lord carries out the promised plague. Every firstborn son in Egypt dies, from Pharaoh's heir to the firstborn of prisoners, and even the firstborn of livestock. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. There is great wailing throughout Egypt, as there is not a single house without someone dead. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt. Pharaoh releases the Israelites. Devastated by the loss, Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron during the night and urges them to leave Egypt with all the Israelites and their belongings. Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me. The Egyptians also urged the Israelites to leave quickly, fearing further destruction. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, we will all die. The Israelites depart. The Israelites leave in haste, taking their dough before it rises and carrying it in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. They also take with them silver, gold, and clothing given to them by the Egyptians. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added. They asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, and so they plundered the Egyptians. About 600,000 men, besides women and children, set out on foot from Ramesses to Succoth. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, establishing the Passover tradition. God instructs Moses and Aaron that the Passover is to be commemorated annually as a festival to the Lord. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. Specific regulations are given about how to observe the Passover, including who may participate and how the meal is to be prepared. These are the regulations for the Passover meal. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. All the members of the community of Israel must celebrate it. Significance of the Passover. The Passover serves as a reminder of God's deliverance of the Israelites from slavery. The blood of the lamb symbolizes protection and salvation. And when your children ask you, "What does this ceremony mean to you?" then tell them, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians." The first Passover and the 10th plague mark the climax of God's judgments against Egypt and the beginning of the Israelites' journey to freedom. The events emphasize obedience to God's instructions and his power to save. The Passover becomes a central tradition in Jewish culture, commemorating God's faithfulness and the liberation of his people. After the Israelites are freed from slavery in Egypt, following the Passover and the death of the Egyptian firstborns, they begin their journey toward the Promised Land. God leads them out, but Pharaoh changes his mind and decides to pursue them with his army. The Israelites find themselves trapped between Pharaoh's forces in the Red Sea, leading to one of the most miraculous events in the Bible, the parting of the Red Sea. The parting of the Red Sea is a defining moment in the Exodus story. It demonstrates God's power to save and protect his people against seemingly impossible odds. Trapped between the sea and an approaching army, the Israelites witness a miracle that affirms their faith in God and in Moses as their leader. This event solidifies their identity as a nation delivered by divine intervention and sets the stage for their journey to the Promised Land. After crossing the Red Sea and escaping from the Egyptians, the Israelites begin their journey through the wilderness toward the Promised Land. They soon face the harsh realities of the desert, including hunger and uncertainty about their food supply. This leads to the miraculous provision of manna and quail by God to sustain them during their journey. The Israelites complain of hunger. About a month and a half after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrive in the desert of Sin, which lies between Elim and Mount Sinai. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. The people begin to grumble against Moses and Aaron because they are hungry. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." They remember the plentiful food they had in Egypt, forgetting the hardships of slavery. Moses hears their complaints and brings them before God. The Lord responds by promising to provide food from heaven. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day." God intends to test the Israelites to see if they will follow his instructions. "In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." Instructions for gathering manna. Moses and Aaron tell the people about God's promise. They assure the Israelites that they will see the Lord's glory. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him." God instructs that each person is to gather an omer, about 2 liters of manna per day, enough for their needs. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The appearance of quail and manna. That evening, quail come and cover the camp, providing meat for the people. That evening, quail came and covered the camp. In the morning, a layer of dew surrounds the camp. When the dew evaporates, thin flakes like frost appear on the ground. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. The Israelites are puzzled and ask, "What is it?" because they do not recognize it. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" for they did not know what it was. Moses tells them that it is the bread the Lord has given them to eat. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." The provision of manna and quail demonstrates God's faithfulness and care for the Israelites in the wilderness. Despite their complaints and lack of trust, God provides for their physical needs while also teaching them obedience and reliance on Him. The daily gathering of manna serves as a test of their faith and a reminder that God is their provider. This event emphasizes the importance of trusting in God's provision and following His instructions. After escaping Egypt and traveling through the wilderness, the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb. Here God intends to establish a covenant with them, giving them laws and guidelines to live by. This event is significant because it lays the foundation for the moral and legal code of the Israelites. In the third month after leaving Egypt, the Israelites set up camp in front of Mount Sinai. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Moses goes up the mountain to meet God, who calls to him from the mountain and gives him a message for the people. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel." God tells Moses that if the Israelites obey him fully and keep his covenant, they will be his treasured possession and a holy nation. "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Moses returns and conveys God's words to the people. The Israelites agree to do everything the Lord has said. So Moses went back and summoned the elders. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." God instructs Moses to have the people consecrate themselves by washing their clothes and abstaining from certain activities, preparing for the third day when God will come down on Mount Sinai. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." Boundaries are set around the mountain to prevent anyone from touching it, as it is holy ground. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, "Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death." On the morning of the third day, there is thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud over the mountain. A loud trumpet blast causes the people to tremble. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Moses leads the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stand at the foot of the mountain. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai is covered with smoke because the Lord descends on it in fire. The whole mountain trembles violently. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The whole mountain trembled violently. God calls Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses goes up. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up. God warns Moses again to make sure the people do not force their way through to see the Lord, or many of them will perish. And the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people so they do not force their way through to see the Lord and many of them perish." The people witnessed the thunder, lightning, trumpet sound, and the mountain in smoke. They are afraid and stand at a distance. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance. They asked Moses to speak to them instead of God directly, fearing that they will die if God speaks to them. They said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die." Moses tells them not to be afraid, explaining that God has come to test them so that the fear of God will keep them from sinning. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." God gives additional laws concerning altars and worship, emphasizing that they should not make idols of silver or gold. "You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold." He instructs them on how to build altars and offer sacrifices. "Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. The receiving of the Ten Commandments marks a foundational moment for the Israelites. God's laws provide guidance on how to relate to Him and to one another. The commandments emphasize worshiping only God, respecting others, and living a moral life. This event establishes the covenant between God and His people, setting them apart as a holy nation. It also highlights the importance of obedience and reverence toward God. The fear and awe experienced by the Israelites reinforced the seriousness of God's commandments and the need to follow them faithfully. After receiving the Ten Commandments and other laws from God on Mount Sinai, Moses stays on the mountain for 40 days and nights. During this time, the Israelites become anxious and impatient, leading to a significant event where they create and worship a golden calf. This incident tests their faithfulness to God and results in severe consequences. While Moses is on the mountain, the people begin to worry about his prolonged absence. They gather around Aaron, Moses' brother and second in command, expressing their concern. The Israelites say to Aaron, "We don't know what has happened to Moses, who led us out of Egypt. Make us gods who will go before us." Their request reflects a loss of trust in both Moses and God. They desire a tangible representation of a deity to lead them. Despite their unfaithfulness, God does not abandon the Israelites entirely. He continues to guide them toward the promised land, demonstrating both justice and mercy. The golden calf incident is a critical lesson about faithfulness, obedience, and the consequences of idolatry. It shows how quickly people can stray from their commitments when faced with uncertainty. Moses' leadership and intercession highlight the importance of accountability and seeking forgiveness. This event reinforces the need to trust in God, even when His plans or timing are not clear. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the epic story of Moses in the Exodus from Egypt. I hope these tales of faith, courage, and miracles have inspired you as much as they inspire me. It's truly amazing to see how these ancient events still hold powerful lessons for us today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who might benefit from these stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming explorations into other fascinating topics. I would love to connect with all of you on a more personal level. Please leave a comment down below and tell me which country you're watching from. Knowing where you're from allows me to keep you in my thoughts and prayers, and it helps build a global community united by shared curiosity and inspiration. Once again, thank you for watching all the way to the end. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting content, and until next time, take care and keep exploring the wonders that life has to offer.